The room was quiet except for my baby's cries. Suddenly, I felt someone pull my hair hard. Before I could react, my husband Elijah yanked my head back and slapped me across the face. Pain shot through my cheek, and tears filled my eyes. I tried to keep my balance while holding my baby close to protect him. My heart raced with fear and disbelief. "This is for your own good, Mary," Elijah said coldly. I couldn't understand how things had gone so wrong so quickly. "Hi, I'm Kelly, and I'm 33 years old. I recently became a mother for the first time. It's been exciting but also really hard. I'm learning how to take care of my newborn and manage everything else at home." Those first days with my baby boy were full of joy, but they were also exhausting. I knew having a baby would change things, but I didn't realize how tough it would be to recover from childbirth while also managing the house. At home, things were a mess. The laundry was piling up, and dishes stayed in the sink longer than I liked. I barely had time for myself because I was always busy with my baby's needs. One afternoon, while I was trying to calm him, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see my mother-in-law, Natalie, standing there. She walked into the living room, and I saw her looking around at the clutter. Baby toys scattered on the floor, unwashed dishes in the kitchen. It wasn't how I wanted her to see our home, but I hadn't had time to clean. Natalie looked at me, and I could see a mix of worry and judgment in her eyes. "I thought I'd come by to check on you," Natalie said, stepping carefully over a toy. "Richard mentioned you might need some help." "Thanks, Natalie," I replied, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. I tried to sound calm as I replied, even though I felt overwhelmed. "Things are a bit crazy right now, but we're managing." Natalie didn't look convinced. She walked into the kitchen, and the sound of unwashed dishes clinking made me feel embarrassed. "Looks like you need more than a little help," she said sharply. "This place is a mess. Is this how you plan to raise my grandsons?" Her words hit me hard, and I felt a mix of frustration, sadness, and stress all at once. I'd been doing my best to keep up with everything, but in that moment, it felt like nothing I did was enough. "I'm doing the best I can," I said, holding my baby closer as if to shield myself from her judgment. Natalie sighed, clearly unimpressed. "Kelly, being a mother is about setting priorities. Right now, it doesn't look like you're prioritizing anything properly." Before I could respond, my husband Richard walked into the room. He quickly sensed the tension and tried to diffuse it. "Mom, Kelly is doing an amazing job," he said, defending me. "It's been tough, especially with the baby not sleeping well." But Natalie wasn't ready to let it go. She turned to Richard with a serious look. "You need to help her understand what's important. It's not just about cleaning, it's about being responsible. She's not living up to the family standards." I could see Richard was caught in the middle. He glanced at me and then at his mother, unsure of what to say. "Mom, let's not do this right now. Kelly is still recovering." Natalie cut him off. "That's exactly why discipline is important. If she learns to manage things now, she'll be better off later. You can't go easy on her, Richard." I was stunned when Richard hesitated and then finally said, "Maybe you're right, Mom. Maybe Kelly does need to learn the hard way." Hearing those words from my husband felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe he would side with his mother, especially after seeing how hard I was trying. Natalie gave a firm nod, as if she'd won. She pushed Richard toward me, saying, "Show her that this kind of behavior can't be tolerated." In that moment, I felt completely shattered. I felt completely overwhelmed. It wasn't just the tiredness or the mess in the house. It was the feeling of being judged and misunderstood by the very people who were supposed to support me. Being a new mom was already hard, and I was doing my best, but it felt like nothing was good enough for Natalie. That day, I realized how much it matters to have people who truly understand what new mothers go through. It's not just about having a clean house or meeting family expectations. It's about doing your best, even when it feels impossible, and having others who lift you up instead of tearing you down. Before I could process it all, Richard grabbed my hair roughly, pulling me toward him. He slapped me hard across the face. The sound was loud, shocking, and unforgettable. It was a moment that crossed a line I never thought he would. I clutched our baby boy tightly as he cried, his sobs mixing with the pounding of my heart. "Richard, what are you doing?" I asked through my tears. The slap hurt, but the pain of betrayal was worse. I couldn't believe this was happening. "This is for your own good, Kelly," Richard said, his voice cold and emotionless. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. "You need to learn." The room went silent except for our baby's soft cries. Richard looked at me briefly, his face showing frustration and maybe some embarrassment, but there was no apology. Natalie stood there, her expression stern. She didn't say a word or even move. It was like she expected this to happen, and her presence made it all worse. What was supposed to be a visit to help me turned into something else entirely. Instead of support, I got judgment. And now this, a slap that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. As Natalie got ready to leave, she whispered something to Richard at the door. I couldn't hear all of it, but her smug look and Richard's troubled face told me it wasn't anything kind. The coldness in the air felt unbearable, making my heart sink even deeper. That night, after all the chaos of the day, I felt more broken than ever. I rocked my son to sleep, trying to comfort both him and myself, but the fear and dread wouldn't go away. What was supposed to be a loving family now felt like something else entirely. It felt like I was being judged, like I was constantly failing in their eyes. As I held my son close, I made a decision. I had to leave. Not just for my safety, but for his too. The house that once felt like a home now felt like a prison, built by the very people who were supposed to love and protect us. Richard had crossed a line, and I couldn't trust him anymore. With Natalie's influence always in the background, it was clear this wasn't a safe place to raise my son. That night, I couldn't bear to sleep next to Richard. Instead, I took my baby to the nursery, a small room that had become my safe space in the past few weeks. Sitting in the rocking chair, holding my son, I replayed the day's events over and over in my mind. Each time, the pain and betrayal felt deeper. I knew I couldn't stay. The next morning, while Richard was at work and Natalie was gone, I made a call to Teresa, a close friend who had offered to help me before. She answered quickly. "Jennifer, it's me. I need the help you offered," I said, my voice shaking with fear and determination. "Say no more, Kelly. I'll come by today with my truck. We can move your things to my place until you figure out your next steps," Teresa said, her voice calm and reassuring. We came up with a simple but risky plan. During the day, I would pack just the essentials for my son and me. Teresa would come in the evening, and we'd quietly move everything out before Richard came home. I couldn't face him again, not after what had happened. I couldn't risk him or Natalie finding out what I was planning. As I packed, my heart raced, but I knew it was the right thing to do. This wasn't just about me. I had to protect my son. He deserved a safe, loving environment. I couldn't let him grow up in a house where violence and control were considered normal. Leaving was hard, but staying would have been harder. This was the start of a new chapter for us, a chapter where I could finally breathe and my son could grow up in peace. I stood there thinking about what would happen if I faced Richard again. He might try to apologize, or worse, Natalie might convince him to keep controlling me. I couldn't let that happen. I knew I had to leave. All day, as I packed my things, every baby outfit and toy felt heavier with memories. I kept thinking about the life I had dreamed of, the family I wanted to build with Richard. But the memory of Richard's slap and Natalie's cold, judgmental eyes reminded me that staying wasn't an option anymore. By late afternoon, most of my things were packed into boxes. I hid them in the garage, trying to stay calm and focused. Just as the sun began to set, Teresa, my best friend, arrived. Seeing her felt like a small light in the middle of the hardest day of my life. "Are you ready?" Teresa asked as she stepped inside, looking at the boxes and bags scattered around. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, holding my baby boy a little tighter. I had to do this, for him, for both of us. We worked quickly, loading everything into her truck. We didn't talk much, but we worked as if we had done this 100 times before. The last room I packed was the nursery. It had been my safe place, the only spot in the house where I felt a little peace. I took one last look around, whispering a quiet goodbye to the life I had once hoped for. But I knew now that dream was over. As we drove away, I watched the house fade in the rearview mirror. A chapter in my life was closing. My heart felt heavy, but deep down, I felt a small flicker of hope. My baby slept peacefully in his car seat, unaware of the big change, but I knew he was safe. This was the start of a new life, a life where fear and control no longer had a hold over us. When we arrived at Teresa's house, I felt a wave of relief. Her home was warm and safe, so different from the oppressive feeling of my old house. Being there made me even more determined to make sure Richard and Natalie could never hurt us again. I realized that leaving wasn't enough. I needed to protect myself and my son and make sure they couldn't twist the story or hurt anyone else the way they had hurt me. I started by reaching out to family and friends, pretending to be okay, while quietly planning the next steps of our new life. I just wanted to check in and reconnect with people. During these conversations, I paid close attention and quietly collected bits of information about Natalie's controlling behavior and how Richard seemed to blindly follow her. Some people hesitated to talk, but many didn't realize just how much influence Natalie had. Over time, I started gathering evidence, text messages, voicemails, and even recorded phone calls that revealed what was really going on behind closed doors. The most shocking piece of evidence came when I managed to record a video of Natalie coaching Richard on how to control me. Her words made it clear this wasn't about care or love, it was about power and control. Once I had enough evidence, I decided it was time to confront them. I chose a family gathering at Richard's sister's house. It was a neutral location with many family members present, some of whom had already hinted they were uncomfortable with Natalie's dominance. I hoped this would be the right time and place to reveal the truth. On the day of the gathering, I was nervous. My hands trembled and my heart raced, but I knew I had to do this. Teresa came with me for support, her presence giving me the courage I needed. As I walked into the room, I could feel the tension. People greeted me quietly, and it was clear they sensed something was about to happen. Word about Richard and Natalie's behavior had spread, even to relatives who lived far away. After some small talk, I took a deep breath and stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "I have something important to say," I began. The room grew silent as everyone turned to look at me. I could feel the weight of their eyes, but I knew I couldn't back down. "It's about Richard and his mother, Natalie," I continued, "and how their actions have affected not just me and my son, but the entire family." Richard's face turned pale, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "Kelly, let's not do this here," he said, trying to interrupt. "No," I replied firmly, pulling out my phone. "This isn't just a personal issue." The room stayed quiet, the tension thick, as I prepared to show everyone the evidence I had gathered. It was time for the truth to come out, and for me to take control of my life again. I connected my phone to the Bluetooth speaker, and the room went silent. The recordings began to play. Natalie's cold, controlling voice instructing Richard on how to handle me, and Richard's hesitant responses agreeing with her. It was all there, plain and clear, their plans to fix me. The reaction in the room was immediate. Some people looked shocked, others disgusted. Richard's aunt, who had always been kind to me, looked heartbroken. She turned to Natalie, her voice shaking. "Is this true, Natalie? Were you really forcing Richard to do this?" Natalie's face turned red with anger and fear. "These are taken out of context," she snapped, trying to defend herself. But it was too late. Richard's cousin, who had been quietly watching, stood up. "No, they're not out of context. We've seen signs of this for years, but we didn't want to believe it." That moment changed everything. Family members began to speak up, sharing their own stories of how Natalie had controlled and manipulated them. Slowly, the truth came out, a picture of a woman who had used her role as a caring mother to dominate her family for years. Richard sat silently, his face pale and overwhelmed. For the first time, he seemed to truly see how much control his mother had over his life. As the room filled with heated discussions about Natalie's behavior, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The truth was out. It wasn't just me who saw it anymore, everyone in the room knew. The family, once under Natalie's control, now had to face the truth about what had been happening for years. The shock was clear on their faces. It was uncomfortable, but it was also necessary. For me, leaving Richard was painful, but I knew it had to be done. There was no going back after everything that had happened. As the family began to leave, I gathered my son, who was blissfully unaware of the storm around him. With one last look at the house that had been both a home and a prison, I stepped into the unknown, knowing it was the right thing for us. Richard stood at the door, watching us leave. His face was filled with sadness and regret. His voice, once so familiar, sounded distant as he whispered a weak goodbye. I didn't look back. Natalie, on the other hand, faced a much harsher reality. The family she had controlled for so long now saw her true colors. They began to pull away, realizing how much harm her actions had caused. Her attempts to regain control were ignored. The evidence from the recordings and the stories shared at the gathering were too much for anyone to overlook. In the weeks that followed, Richard tried to contact me. His messages were full of apologies, promises to change, and pleas for forgiveness. But I couldn't forget the memory of his raised hand or how much his mother had influenced him. The trust between us was broken, and with it, our marriage. I knew this was the end of one chapter and the start of a new one. I wasn't just leaving a bad situation. I was beginning a new life. A life free from control and fear, where I could focus on raising my son in a safe and loving environment. I found a small apartment far away from the neighborhood I used to call home. It was a fresh start, a place where no one knew my story, and I could move forward without the weight of the past holding me back. Teresa, my best friend, stayed by my side through it all. Her support meant the world to me as I worked to create a safe and stable life for my son and myself. My days were simple but meaningful, filled with caring for my son and slowly rebuilding my life. The healing process wasn't easy. It was slow, and some days hurt more than I expected. There were moments when the weight of everything that had happened felt almost unbearable. But the freedom to make my own choices, without fear of being controlled or manipulated, kept me moving forward. It felt like a second chance, a fresh start where I could finally live on my own terms. I started going to therapy, where I learned how to heal from the emotional pain I carried. I also joined support groups for single mothers. Meeting others who had been through similar struggles helped me feel less alone. Over time, the broken pieces of who I used to be began to come back together. I wasn't the same person I was before, but I was stronger and determined to build a better future for me and my son. I wasn't the same person I used to be. I was stronger now, more determined, and I had learned how to protect myself and my son from anything that might hurt us. My son's laughter became my strength, pulling me through even on the hardest days. Watching him grow and reach new milestones brought me so much happiness. Every small moment gave me more hope for the future. As he started walking and talking, I felt my own confidence growing too. I was learning how to be a mom, how to create a safe and loving home, and how to live without fear. Time passed quickly, and before I knew it, a year had gone by. One evening, after putting my son to bed, I sat down in our cozy living room. It was filled with his drawings and toys, clear signs of the happy life we were building together. As I looked around, I couldn't help but think about how far we had come. The pain of the past was still there, like a shadow, but it wasn't as heavy as it used to be. The light of new beginnings shone brighter now, and the support of friends like Teresa and the unconditional love of my son gave me strength. That night, while sipping a cup of tea, I realized I was ready to share my story. I started a blog, a place where I could write about everything I had been through. It wasn't just for me. It was for others who might be going through similar struggles. I wanted to reach out to people dealing with manipulation or abuse and let them know they weren't alone. Each blog post I wrote felt like a step forward. It helped me move away from the person I used to be, a victim, and toward someone who could help others. Over time, I realized I had become an advocate. I had found my voice, and I was using it to speak out against the control and manipulation I had once endured. My story became one of resilience and strength in the face of hardship. As I finished my story, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Do you believe it's possible to completely break free from the control of a manipulative family, or do the effects stay with us forever? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments.